go to Nebraska and win, and only lose 55-0. And then the next year it'd be 72-0 again. I mean, there were like 3 years in a row where it was just,
right.
It wasn't a game. Well, that's what we went up against when we played the Coyotes. I mean, but yeah, and I think Coach Beavers knew that we would never compete with or absolutely beat the Coyotes. It just wasn't really going to happen. But that wasn't the important thing to him. The important thing to him was to compete, and to not just compete on that one night or during that 1 week as you're preparing for them. You've got to compete that way 52 weeks out of the year, because
right.
when I was young, we had spring football, which was 6 weeks of off-season program, then 3 weeks in pads, and then we had a spring game. That was just not for the high school. That was for the junior highs. Everybody did that.
Right.
And so while we're doing drills, laps, pull-ups, sit-ups, weights, bench press, whatever we're doing, you did a set of 10 or a set of 5. Well, to him, that wasn't enough. You always had to do one more. You had to do one for the Coyotes.
Right.
So think about it, and that type of work ethic that's instilled into a young person like myself from the 7th grade on.
Right.
And add to that the discipline I got from my dad, being in a military family. That's where you get the title to the book, One
right.
for the Coyotes. You can do whatever you have to do to succeed, but it's always best and always better if you do it a little more.
Right.
And so that's been basically my work mantra, and that's where we get the title to the book.
Interesting. Talk about the social aspect of high school in a Texas community.
Interesting. Interesting. There's I think I said before that there's that's football, and the sport of football and the entity that football is in Texas just permeates the community. But there are often times where the booster club or the drill team or the cheerleader squad, they are showcased just as much as the football team.
Right.
And that's what I mean by permeating the community
mm-hmm. right.
and having importance in the community. The head football coach at my high school, and he was only head coach up until the end of my junior year. I'll get to that in a moment, if you will. But he said once, and I still believe this to a large extent, that the only activity where young people can gather for the betterment of the community, something positive community, I say the only, you have more young people gathering publicly for the betterment of the community, something positive for the community. The only thing other than football that brings that many young people together is church.
Right.
Now I've all these years I've been trying to figure out, where do young people gather for something positive and constructive for the community other than church, to where they do this more often than at a Friday night high school football game.
Right. And
so if that definition, however convoluted I just made it, if that makes sense,
right,
that's the importance of what football was for me and for a lot of people that I knew growing up in Texas. But everyone can find an importance and a way to contribute. Sometimes bad things happen at football games, but most often something good comes out. Somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose, but everybody finds something positive, a way to grow, a way to mature, a way to contribute to the community through an endeavor like a high school football game or a high school football program.
You mentioned the structure of the military helping out as far as being an African-American family and providing and things like that. What was the racial atmosphere in the 70s in Texas at a high school?
Another good question. I don't know where you're finding a way to help me. You're forcing me to explain some things that need explaining.
Right.
But I always grew up in an environment where I didn't live on a side of the street that was all black,
right,
or a part of town that was the majority black. I grew up mostly on a military base, or I grew up, when we did move back to Texas when I was in 5th grade, my parents built a home. We had a brand new home built, $14,000 if I can remember,
Right.
and we built it in a part of town that was middle class.
Right.
And so I never felt that there was a struggle. I knew from television and I knew from news events that there was unrest in a lot of places in this country, L.A., Detroit, Chicago, in the South. But I never felt a part of that because the military and my military upbringing and the fact that I had something else to do. I was never bored because I was so connected with sports.
Right.
And especially football. I always had something else to do to keep me busy. My mind didn't wander anywhere.
Right.
And other than that path that my dad and my high school football coach put me on. But I knew it was there, and I could see it. I remember when Martin Luther King was assassinated. I didn't learn about it until that following morning, 7 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
But there was unrest in the home. And then I remembered, months later, Bobby Kennedy assassinated.
Right.
And some of these events, as we come upon 50 years of man landing on the moon, I remember these things. And there was a time, Danny, when I'm 12 years old, and I said to myself, these things are big. And it wasn't until years later to where, I say years, maybe less than a decade later, where I knew the 70s aren't as big as the 60s. 60s were big. These were life-changing moments. These were generational changing moments.
Right.
And I realized then, I didn't know how to define it, but I knew that they were huge.
So at the end of high school, what was your decision-making process as far as your future is concerned? You ended up going to Texas Tech University.
I wanted out of a small town.
Okay.
Wanted out of a small town. Big time. I gotta go. I can't. There were, it doesn't matter. It didn't matter to me that I was brought up in a world or in a family where color didn't mind. It minded to a lot of people in a small town in Texas. And I always wanted to play college football. I wanted to play Southwest Conference football. I wasn't dumb enough to think I could, play at Texas or Texas A&M or something, but I knew I could get into school at Texas Tech, and so I walked on and lasted all of 2 weeks. 2 weeks, and that was fine. I don't know, Danny. When we're young, a lot of times when people are young and free and 14, 17, 18 years old, and you're involved in a sport for as long as I was, or maybe you were, or someone else was, you think, man, I'm going to be playing ball the rest of my life. I'll be this athletic for the rest of my life. And that just didn't happen. So for me, I walked on at Texas Tech. I wanted to experience Southwest Conference football. Never really did, other than 2 weeks of practice before I got cut. And I went to school. I majored in telecommunications because, I don't know, I like sports and I like TV.
Right.
You know what? I was 12 years old, and I loved watching Vern Lundquist on Channel 8 in Dallas. That was I was in the 7th grade, and I went through great measures to watch Channel 8 sports every night. Kept me off the streets, and I loved television sports, and I watched Vern Lundquist. And so that was my dream job, was to be a sportscaster. Had no idea how to get there.
Right.
And eventually I went to Tech, made terrible grades, managed to stay in school, and I'd go home during the summers and find a job and make a couple of $100 and go back to school and struggle and live paycheck to paycheck and struggle and do this. So finally in 1978, which should have been the fall of my junior year, I'm only like a third-year sophomore. And I leave home that summer, and I had no money. I didn't save anything. Saved no money. And my dad said, I was leaving to go back to school. He said, we're going to go up to the gas station here. I'm going to give you a tank of gas. And he gave me a $1 bill. I should say a silver dollar, but it was a coin.
Right.
And he said, I'll see you in 2 weeks. And I said, okay. So I go to Lubbock for my
your fourth year as a rising junior.
Yes. And it's late summer 1978, and I had a friend in Fort Worth who I'd had a class with, a telecommunications class or mass comm or something, and she had stayed during the summer and had met her boyfriend. They're still married, lived in Fort Worth. But she said, I said, hey, what'd you do this summer? She said, well, I stayed here, and I got a job at the TV station. And I couldn't believe it. I said, what are you talking about? What? She said, I got a job at the ABC station. I said, doing what? She said, oh, just working in the studio, sweeping floors. And wow, that's unbelievable. I could never do that. And I just kind of blew it off. Well, I went and applied, Danny. I'm looking for jobs, and I found a job parking cars. And I had that job, this is mid-August, because I was living in an apartment, so I went up early to try to find a job so I could start, find a way to pay tuition and such. I had that lasted about a week. And then I had applied for another job at the Lubbock Avalanche Journal, the newspaper.
Right.
And I was going to, I would have to show up to work at midnight. And then the lady said, when I applied for this job, she said, you're going to have to bring, remember those long tube socks, the white tube socks come up to your knees? She says, you need an old pair of those because you're going to be pulling the newspapers off the press and you're going to get ink all over your arms or your shirt sleeves or whatever. So you need to put those tube socks on. Well, I needed a job. And even though that didn't sound attractive to me, I said, okay, I'm going to take this job. Okay. So my first day to work was going to be the Sunday night before Labor Day, or of Labor Day weekend. Labor Day is on a Monday. My first day was going to be midnight Monday morning. Okay.
Right.
And so that Labor Day weekend, I'm living with these two guys. We have an apartment, and we had one of those beer and burger parties on a Sunday night because there's no class tomorrow. School doesn't start. Classes don't start till Tuesday. So we have like 20, 30 people over, and everybody's asking me all evening, why aren't you drinking? You're not drinking beer. You're not look like having fun. And all these people are having a blast. But I'm in my mind, I got to go to work tonight. 11:45 hits. I'm getting this all night. What's wrong with you? Why aren't you having fun? 11:30, 11:45 said, and I said, I just cannot do this. I cannot do this job. And I just never showed up. I never showed up. So now it's starting from scratch as I get more long-winded. That week, I went, per my friend's suggestion, I go knock on the door at the ABC TV affiliate in Lubbock, Texas. And I asked for a job in the production department. And the guy, the production manager, John Curry, sits me down, and we talked for 10 minutes. He took my application. He said, it was a Friday, September 8th, 1978. He said, oh, we'll give you a call. I went back home, and he called me back. He said, can you start? I said, yeah. So that was my first day to work, was Friday, September 8th, 1978. I made $2.90 an hour, and I was sweeping floors and running prompter. I got 20 hours a week. And he told me, later on, within a week or so, he says, man, you'll do this job for 2 weeks, and you'll know if you'll want to do this for the rest of your life. Now, that can't fit everybody. Right. But it fit me. I fell in love. $2.90 an hour. And that job was the best-looking girl I'd ever seen.
It's a good time to take our time out with Al Wallace as we continue on Kansas City Profiles presented by Easton Roofing, and we'll get into Al's career coming up next. We like to do more with the stuff you don't know about than the stuff you do, but the stuff you do is fun too. That's coming up next.
More of Danny's Reasonably Irreverent podcast after this.
Before you spend your time and money going after an MBA, ask yourself why. Is it so you can tell people you got your MBA? So you can add a line to your CV? So you can call it a CV instead of a resume? Truth is, any MBA will do that. On the other hand, if your goal is to learn how to successfully manage and grow a business with real-world insights from experienced professionals, Well, consider getting your MBA from Park University. Our low student-to-teacher ratio gives you personalized